are people who hold the planets together by clicking the Achilles heels 3 times. There are people who skywrite without an airplane, without a net. There are people who twirl a room like a rodeo for the sheepish. There are people who have bowling parties in their pajamas while the rest of the world seems like a pin waiting for an angel to step out onto the dance floor. There are people who seem to have eyeball upon eyeball like gumballs in an arcade of vision. There are people who walk into a room, a thermometer preceding them. There are people who wear their weather like perfume. There are people who know the cuckoo is a state bird of most states of mind. There are people who went to the same high school and spent each recess in the lost and found room uttering their phonetic name. There are people who will have conversations deep as deathbed soliloquies and never speak again. There are people who make whatever street they're on Telegraph Avenue 1964. There are people who write a shopping list in hieroglyphics. There are people who look up at the sun 8,000 times a day and lack an eclipse. There are people who drag questions from the tongue like photos 1 second before the crisp of a fire. There are people who ask nothing and your heart sits like a blank check in a bookstore that sells only elegy. There are people with a little past behind their ears. There are people with a newscast on their eyebrows. There are people, no matter how many apples they held, teachers resented them. There are people who ring many doorbells but won't let themselves in. There are people who light candles half the week and swallow swords the rest. There are people who memorize the footprints made by the snow. There are people who dine on shivers. There are people who chew on icicles all year round. There are people who pray with the nostalgia of baseball. There are people who laugh at life, open-mouthed like a kid.